Right now, to finish out the evening, we have a special guest speaker. So I get to introduce Dr. Raina Croff, who is an assistant professor of neurology at the School of Medicine at OHSU. She's a native of Portland. She's a medical anthropologist, and she has studied health and healing practices in a variety of communities, including African American, American Indian, and Alaskan Native communities. She's also done some very interesting culturally relevant community-based cognitive health interventions for older adults. And you can see that she's with the Aging and Alzheimer's Disease Center, so we might hear a little bit about that research, but I also know that she is an excellent mentor to graduate students and also to undergraduates. She's been a mentor to a couple of our scholars in her research learning community where she gets them involved in these projects around Portland. And they've led to posters and presentations, and she was actually the research mentor for one of our very first EXITO graduates, who's now accepted into Howard University and is back in DC and doing great things. So Raina has been, like so many other research mentors, a critical part of our program, and we're really happy that she's here to share some comments with you tonight. So let's hear it from Raina. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Timer on. This message, you got this, is just as much for you as it is for me, because I'm about to do something that I've never done before. I have never given an inspirational keynote address. I've given lots of academic talks, very structured, problem statement, aims, method, results discussion. This was a creative new endeavor for me. So this talk is about vulnerability, putting yourself out there, doing something new. But it's really about doing the work in here so that you can confidently put yourself out there. So my motto in creating this was, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be out there. So when I started my academic journey, I was about 1 billion miles away from neurology. So now, as Tom said, I work with African Americans 55 and older around cognitive health and Alzheimer's disease. But I started out, my participants, when I was doing research as an undergraduate and later as a graduate student, my participants were 300 years old. I was an archaeologist, or I was striving to be. That had been my childhood dream. But that dream actually started with my mom. So in 1968, she was a high school senior, and there was a small inner voice that said, I want to be an archaeologist. Now you can imagine, 1968, there weren't a lot of women role models who were archaeologists. Her parents had never been to college. No one in our family had been to college. And her parents said, why don't you just be a secretary? They didn't have the money for college. That was a perfectly good job, and it is a good job. But it wasn't the job for my mom. Society didn't support her. You can imagine the types of roles that they envisioned young women to be in 1968. So she virtually had no outside support, so she had to rely on the inner voice. So despite all that lack of external support, she dared to be vulnerable. And she sought out a professor and was going to ask this man what it would take to become an archaeologist. So you can imagine all the questions that were going on in her mind. What if he thinks I'm stupid? What if I just don't have what it takes? What if he asks me a question and I say something ridiculous? I'm sure all of you have thought that at some point. Well, he looked at her and said, do you want to be an archaeologist? So do you want to have a family? She said, well, yeah. So you want to work in remote places around the world, and yet you expect to still be able to have a family. So I wish I could tell you that she tuned out all of those outer voices, and that she tuned into her inner voice and turned on her heels and left that office with a plan B already bubbling in her mind, but that's not what happened. She didn't have the external supports to support the growth or to amplify that inner voice, so she closed the door on that dream. So she had a family, and when she had a little girl, she told that little girl that she could be whatever she wanted to be. That was me. And I went to college. I was the first one in our family to go to college. My father comes from a sharecropping family in Mississippi, 14 children. He can't really still read or write all that well. So I was the first person in my family to go to college on both sides. And I had the family support. My mom, single mom raising me, but I had all the support. Encouragement, I had outside support. I had great academic programs. I didn't have EXITO, it wasn't around then. I think maybe I would have been accepted if it was around then, who knows. But I had McNair scholars. I had other great programs. I had good teachers. And eventually, I got grants. And I ended up working on a UNESCO World Heritage Site, doing my dissertation work. So I had done all the right work to get there. The good writing, the good turning my assignments on time, everything you need to get the outer success, right? So all the external support had gotten me over a lot of roadblocks and had gotten me far, but there was still one block that I had been carrying around inside me, and that was self-doubt. So when it was time for me to find a job and I wasn't getting called for interviews, or I would just make it to the first round, and when those connections I thought I had made were dead-ending, instead of the inner voice telling me that I could do it, it was some other voice in there that started to get louder. And I started to think, maybe if those applications had been colorblind, maybe I wouldn't have been accepted. Maybe I don't really have what it takes, or maybe I thought that I was smart, but there was something. It doesn't matter what I was saying, but it wasn't saying you can do this. So I wish I could tell you, like my mom, that I tuned out the outer and I tuned up the inner, but the truth is I had never truly done my own inner work, the real work behind the work that brings success. So I didn't become an archaeologist. I didn't keep going when it got rough. I just sort of said, it's not happening, it's not coming my way, and I sort of just complained and sat there. So eventually I got a job at Oregon Health and Science University, and it was interesting. I was doing qualitative research, interviewing substance abuse treatment agencies who serve American Indian and Alaska Natives, and we were looking at how these treatment agencies it's me with my self-doubt. We were looking at how these treatment agencies integrated traditional healing practices and evidence-based medicine. So the cultural piece was fascinating. But I was speaking to treatment agencies, I wasn't speaking to individuals, and I still had that history piece, that archaeology piece that was inside me that I wanted to explore the connections of place and history and stories and artifacts. But I was at OHSU, and that's not exactly, you don't think archaeology when you think of health sciences. So I had a soul sister, and I hope that all of you have a soul sister or a soul brother or a soul friend, someone who you can tell anything to, and someone who will tell you anything back. And she said, stop complaining, because that's basically all I did at that time. I was like, it's not turning out the way I thought it was supposed to turn out. Well, she said, you have to decide what you really want and just keep going till you get it. She said, you have to reach out. You have to talk to people. Whatever it takes. She said, success is not an accident. You have to be intentional and you have to be visionary. So I don't know if those were the exact words she said, but it was inspiring to that nature. And she said, visionary, you have to be visionary. And I thought, before I could be visionary out there to see how in the world could I fit in my passions with this health sciences environment where I've found myself, I had to be visionary in here. I had to dare to see myself as having everything already inside me that I needed to succeed. So that doesn't mean that I already knew everything, that I didn't need help from anybody else. It meant that I had the skills to take the first step. I had the skills to research who I needed to reach out to. I had the skills to write a good email or pick up the phone. And these are tiny steps. But when you add together a bunch of tiny steps, you get somewhere. So I started to think, okay, this setting intentions, being intentional, trying to not just go with the flow, but to create the flow. So I said, okay, how do I bring my passion for history and artifacts and stories and place into a health research career? I wasn't going to leave OHSU because it was a good job, but I wanted to see how far I could go within that environment. At that time, I was a research associate. I didn't have my own grants. I didn't have my own projects. I was working on other people's stuff. But I was still afraid. I don't know why I had this self-doubt that just kept coming back and coming back, but I did. I was afraid people would think that my ideas of trying to bring archaeology or oral history or sense of place into talking about how to improve, cognitive health scores. Well, let me tell you what happened. Remember my motto in the beginning? I said it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be out there. I just messed up in my talk, but it's out there. So let me back up a little bit. I was afraid to be vulnerable, to put myself out there. And so if me, a Yale PhD Fulbright scholar, was still grappling with self-doubt, I'll bet that many of you are right now. But I hope that you don't wait until after you get your PhD, until after you've already let one dream slip by for you to find that confidence and start amplifying your own inner voice. So, an article not too long ago in the Washington Post said, the title was, "First generation college students are not succeeding in college and money isn't the problem." And then within that article there's a quote. They say, "Even when students manage to cobble together scholarships, loans, or gifts from relatives or churches, once they actually get into college, they typically find they have a whole new set of unanticipated barriers, academic, social and cultural, as well as their own internal self-doubt. Students whose parents didn't go to college face several unique challenges. They are less likely to have confidence in their academic abilities." So I was just that far along in my career, starting to work on my confidence at a real internal soul level. And I started to think, everybody says it's all connected, it's all connected. There are a million ways to connect my passions to health sciences. And I have to figure out just one of those connections and go with it. The next thing I kept telling myself was, I have a purpose. Whatever idea it is, whatever connection that I'm trying to make, if it's of interest to me, it's probably of interest to other people. At that time, my interest was the local history of Portland, the history of gentrification in Portland, and the history that was rapidly being erased, and how could we capture that? And then, of course, how could I apply to health grants, where actually the good money is at, and create a program that somehow incorporated these aspects, these passions of mine, into the center where I was working at that time for Alzheimer's disease research. So I had to believe that somehow it was connected. I just had to find one connection, and that I had a purpose because it was of interest to me, it was of interest to my community. And then I just had to proceed as if I were necessary. You've probably heard this before. Have you all heard this? Proceed as if necessary? Good. So I've inspired you a little bit. You have learned something new. You have to proceed as if necessary because you are necessary. If you don't tell yourself that you're necessary, that the work or the interest that you have, that you're bringing to the table is necessary, other people aren't necessarily going to do that. You have to amplify your own inner voice before other people will hear it and start to amplify it with you. So I had an idea. I'd been thinking about my passions, this whole history thing, and how can I integrate it into something that I'm hearing my community, my own community, talk about. Loss of spaces, of loss of community, a new demographic moving in, them not seeing a reflection of themselves in this changing neighborhood. And then at the same time, I'm learning that African Americans are about twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline, and I knew that there had to be some sort of connection. So I said, me, along with one person who I found who told me that, yeah, I don't know what it is, but I think there's some connection there. So my voice was amplified a little bit by somebody else. And I said, what if I went through the archives and just started looking at old pictures, trying to find old landmarks of some of the areas that have been really impacted by gentrification. Landmarks and aspects of community. You see here a flyer about Black United Front, which was a civil rights group in Portland and Chicago as well. Not Community Street Station, looking at some of the history of African Americans in Portland, starting from World War II when they were working in the shipyards. I started finding all sorts of, these were like artifacts for me. I was digging through there. I wasn't in the ground, but I was still being able to bring my passion to the archives, and I was digging up all these interesting pictures. And then I thought, well, I'm learning about the impact of physical activity on brain health. Through working at the center, I had started to learn about the importance of being socially engaged and not isolating, and how that's really important for healthy aging because of all the different things that go into conversation that keeps your brain sharp. And I started learning about reminiscence therapy. And I was like, there's something here. The connections were starting to happen. And I said, well, what if we combined walking in the historically Black neighborhoods? People were walking together in groups of 3 where they're being social. We provide these images as memory prompts tied to specific locations in the neighborhood. So that they're doing the memory work when they're standing in front of Nazi Street Station, community center, which is now Matt Dishman Community Center. They're thinking about what was while they're walking past what is. I think there's something here for brain health. So that first person who would listen to my inner voice and who would help me amplify it, she helped me find somebody else who amplified it a little more. I found somebody else who amplified that inner voice. By that time it was starting to be an outer voice, a little bit more. And I had moved from a mentor I had just sort of fell into to a mentor who really said I could do it. Remember when I said the talk doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be out there. I forgot to mention that my mentor that I had just fallen into, I had first said these ideas to this person. And he chuckled at me and said, maybe you should teach Black studies. Like there wasn't a place for Afrocentric ideas or approaches in Alzheimer's disease research. So, like I said, I had found that other person who would listen to that inner voice, and eventually led me to the mentor I was supposed to be with, who was an intentional fit rather than just falling into this relationship. And my mentor, Jeffrey Kay, who's director of the Alzheimer's Disease Center at OHSU, he said, yes, this is great, why not? And then he said, and we can create an app. And instead of, because my idea was, let's have images or holding, rain protected images. So let's create an app. And why not do cognitive assessments before and after? And why not count their steps? And let's take their blood pressure. And let's take their weight. And we'll start to have these, I had brought the innovative, hard to see at first connection. But once I brought that to the table, he helped me put it all together in a way that was competitive for grants. So we wrote a grant, and we got rejected. And then we wrote another grant, and we got it, and it was small. So this is what the grant had proposed. It had proposed to put, to take these images we were finding, get creative with it, find a theme. So we found these images, and the theme here was childhood and family. And you You can see that it's like a 1 mile walking route. Participants get together in threes. They walk a route 3 times a week for 6 months, which is 72 walks. And they walk and talk about these ideas, about these questions, and they're also at the same time walking through the neighborhood and sharing their memories. And we turned these 3 images, we started calling them memory markers, and we started grouping them together into themes, and we created about 20 or 25 or so themes. So participants could scroll through on the app that we created, which I'll show you next. They could scroll through and pick a theme, and all 3 of the images on that walk would pertain to that theme. So we did a pilot, and we started to create the app. Okay, we started to create the app, and it was exciting because I'm not a very technological person. I was the one that wanted paper photographs at first, and it didn't always work. It failed a lot, but I could see that it was possible, that there was something to this. Then, when we started getting participant feedback, when we really were interacting with participants, this idea that we had brought together was creating lasting friendships. We found that people who had been walking for 2, 3, 4 months together were starting to see each other outside of the program. And the social engagement that they were doing inside the program had spurred them to be socially engaged outside of the program as well. They had things to talk about. They were putting themselves out there. They were meeting new people, and these connections were all starting to happen. So this here is, doesn't everybody see? Somebody should have said something. Okay, good. This is Jewel. This is my EXITO scholar that I have this year. She's with 3 of our participants. We call this Team Wonderful because, actually they call themselves that because, can you hear me? They called themselves Team Wonderful because they didn't realize that they had other family ties, and they knew each other who knew each other, and they just came together really beautifully. So in the meantime, we wrote another grant, and we got a 5-year grant from the CDC. And then we wrote another grant, and we got a grant from the Alzheimer's Association to do a second round, where instead of having all 7 teams, or 7 teams of 3 who were cognitively normal, we had 7 people who had mild cognitive impairment. So I'm just going to give you a little sample of what it sounds like on this walk.
Now we're trying to record some of the old history of the neighborhood before it's forgotten. A lot of new people come in, they don't know the history. See, this used to be a supermarket right here. Yeah. Yeah. Mark Strong's, he's the pastor. His grandpa and I work together on the waterfront. Yeah. And I used to be state senator of this area. So we're trying to record the history so new folks can remember.
So, did you hear him say he used to be the senator of this area? We had gotten gatekeepers. We had gotten key people in the community to join, including Senator Abel Gordley. She was our first participant. We had gotten Judge Charlotte Rutherford as well. We had Senator Boyer. And, you know, a lot of these folks, they had been seriously impacted by the changes. They'd been driving past the main streets, but they hadn't walked at a walker's pace through the streets and really seen all the changes. So this was giving them a chance to have opportunistic social engagement as they were walking down the street, and people were asking, hey, what are you guys doing? And they were able to share a piece of their history and start to feel a little bit more integrated into the community that had originally been a historically black, that is a historically black community, but now they don't really see other people that look like them so much in this area. So some of the feedback we got from our participants, you know, it's brought around many memories for me because almost every route I know 3, 4, 5 people on that route where they lived, and some who still live there. And I run past a few places where I lived. So we had really created something that was not only personally relevant, but it was relevant to the community as well. We we were addressing a community priority of preserving history while addressing individual needs to preserve cognitive health. The remembrance is so important, and I think that pushes back the Alzheimer's when people forget. Well, they have a name right on the tip of their tongue, and somebody says, well, that's such and such. Oh, and then that kicks in a whole bunch of other memories. And I think that's insightful. That's good. That's good. Just walking together brings all those memories back, and names that you have forgotten, hadn't heard for 15 or 20 years or longer, brings back, and that's joyful. So out of this intentional decision to start muting that voice of self-doubt, to start getting intentional about the mentoring relationships I was developing, the direction in which I wanted my work to go, stop wasting my own energy on complaining, but actively creating the flow instead of just falling into someone else's flow. We had created a program that was meaningful to people, even more so than on the level of improving their cognitive health, but really serving something within them that had been traumatized by gentrification. They were beginning to heal from the trauma of gentrification. And that was something we hadn't quite expected. So this participant says, as an example of this act of healing, it made me walk past my mother's house, and I had not done that since she passed away. My walking partner said, come on, come on. Then I started talking about all the changes and the people that lived in the community and what they did at that time, but it was part of my growing and I had to do it. I had no idea when I had decided how in the world am I going to bring my passion for history and archaeology, this dream that I thought I had laid to rest in the ground, that's an archaeology pun. How in the world, I had no idea what this could become. And if I hadn't begun the intentional work, as I said before, none of this would have come to fruition. It was blossoming into something beautiful and something meaningful and purposeful. People were finding purpose in these walks, knowing that their conversations were being recorded and could be shared with future generations to talk about what makes a healthy community in the past and how can we make a healthy community going forward. And I had begun to mentor students where I had had self-doubt and where I had needed critical mentoring. Now I was a mentor, and I was able to bring EXITO students, like yourselves, into this program. And in fact, we had an 85% retention rate. Those people, 85% of our 21 participants staying on for 6 months, walking 3 times a week, which is a pretty big commitment, precisely because, or in part because, many factors, but in no small part, because they felt that they were investing in the next generation of cognitive health researchers, because they were supporting the role of the EXITO scholars that were on the program. And the EXITO scholars were being supported by the engagement of the older adults in the intervention. So we've gotten a lot of press coverage. We had a piece by the Associated Press that was picked up by all sorts of media outlets. And just today, in fact, I spent all morning doing a documentary filming. Raina Croff, who's done some other pieces in the past, has won some awards, and I won't go into all that, you can look her up. But she flew out from the East Coast to do a piece on the sharp intervention, on this intervention, to talk about the impact, the disproportionate impact that Alzheimer's disease has on people of color, and what innovative scientists are doing to combat that. So now all of a sudden I was an innovative scientist. This idea I was afraid to bring to the table, this idea that someone had said, oh, that belongs in Black studies, was being celebrated. But more importantly than being celebrated by people outside of the program, it was the celebration that the participants were really feeling like that they were belonging to something meaningful. So, health disparities facing our communities are many. And you'll see in this quote here, it says, if you are Black, you are 21% more likely to die from heart disease than if you are white. If you live in the Deep South, your Your life is an average of 3 years shorter than if you live in other parts of the US. And if you live below the poverty line, you are 25% more likely than higher income Americans to develop hypertension. Health disparities like these not only affect the day-to-day experiences of individuals, but also threaten the prosperity and well-being of entire communities. So we need you to do your inner work, your confidence building, your cultivating of that inner voice and finding the right people to amplify that voice. We need you to do all this inner work alongside the outer work of showing up, being engaged in the research, being engaged in the classes, being engaged in this program. We need you to cultivate your confidence alongside your accomplishments. We need you, our communities need you, to be confident enough to be vulnerable and to go out on a limb and try something new to address old problems that keep plaguing us. Sylvia Matthews, who served President Obama, says, today African Americans have the highest mortality rate of any racial and ethnic group for cancer generally and for most major cancers individually. Latino communities also suffer from disproportionate rates of illness, like cervical cancer. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are more likely to have hepatitis B than non-Hispanic whites, and African Americans, Latinos, and American Indians are all more likely to have diabetes. Your communities need you to be exactly where you are. You are exactly where you need to be to take the next step on your path. You have everything you need to succeed. So maybe you've heard the idea that the tiny seed, I guess you can take a seed from any tree, let's say an oak tree. People seem to like to talk about strong oak trees. Do you think that seed has that self-doubt saying, oh gosh, I wonder if I'm going to be able to grow. I wonder if I'm going to know when to sprout. I wonder if maybe I'm not going to be good enough. Maybe I'm not going to be able to make it out of the seed shell to start from. No, it just grows. It just grows. It just does what it's naturally supposed to do. It's encoded in its DNA. And you have to trust that you have everything within you to succeed. You have everything you need to take that first step, which will lead you to the next step, which will start making connections, which will start to help you lead you to the people who will amplify that inner voice. So this is Alexa Kennedy. Has anybody heard of Dr. Alexa Kennedy? She was the first African-American neurosurgeon. And she later became the chief of neurosurgery at the Children's Hospital in Michigan. And she said that she underwent a crisis of confidence. She says, the greatest challenge I faced in becoming a neurosurgeon was believing it was possible. So the greatest limitation out there, yes, there are real limitations, but the greatest limitation isn't out there. It's how limited you feel about yourself. There's limitations inside. So while Alexa Kennedy was attending the University of Michigan, a health career summer program for minority students, it sparked her interest in medicine. So I don't want you to wait till you have your PhD to believe in yourself. Don't waste time going through this program without intention, without setting goals, without knowing that you're sitting at a table of abundance. Don't show up with your little salad plate. Come with your big old platter. And really partake in what this program has to offer. Don't just expect it to come to you or sort of find yourself in someone else's flow, but be part of creating your own flow. So these are things that I wish people had told me, someone had told me when I was an undergraduate, or basically at any stage, but it would have been really helpful back then. So look back, then look inside. You come here with a story, you come from a community. How has that community made you who you are? How has who you are gotten you this far? And what is it going to take for you to not just make it through, to use this experience, this environment of abundance, but what's it going to take to really move you forward? Whose voices in your life do you want to amplify? And which ones do you need to turn off? What noise you need to quiet so you can start hearing that inner voice and start knowing your own worthiness to be vulnerable enough to put yourself out there? and connect with your peers, to connect with your academic mentors, your research mentors, and to start creating your network. Do you take time to listen to yourself? Do you practice intentionality and goal setting? Do you have affirmations? Do you do self-check-ins? Do you? I won't ask you to raise your hand. I wish someone had told me to just bring my authentic self. I kept thinking that I had to conform instead of reform. You know, I kept thinking that I had to be the certain kind of student, I had to come with these certain kinds of interests, and if it didn't align, then it didn't align. But everything is connected. You just have to find that one connection and roll with it. And if that's not the right connection, you'll find another one. So how are you going to share what you have to give? How are you going to bring your unique life experiences, your cultural worldview, your exploratory mind into your lab? I know you have, I think, a year until you get to your lab. So you've got a year to think about it and to cultivate that. You know, science is a form of creativity. I got to be really creative with my project. It was so much fun finding the pictures and connecting them and seeing how in the world that they could create a theme. Science is a form of creativity, and creativity really happens in the space of vulnerability. If you ask any artist, they're putting themselves out there. They are vulnerable. They're not thinking necessarily about the outcomes, they're just doing the process. I wish I had heard this quote. You are not lucky to be here. The world needs your perspective. They are lucky to have you. You're not here to fulfill some sort of, you're not here just because we need visible diversity. You're here because your mind is brilliant. You might not know it yet, but it is, and it will start to blossom as you connect yourself with the right people. So don't fall into that trap of thinking that diversity initiatives are here to help you out. They are here to help us all out. We are better, stronger, we are more visionary with diversity. And there is diversity within diversity within diversity. So we need your unique perspective, your way of processing, your new angle to an old problem. So why would you want to hold back from the rest of the world what we need to forward the evolution of science? I wish someone had told me to just be calm and ask my questions. Some of my greatest moments of self-doubt was just speaking up in class. I would either miss the right opportunity because other people just jumped in and I know that was the right time. Now they've gone on to some other topic. Or, oh gosh, I think I'm supposed to already know this. Was this in the text we were supposed to read? Maybe I missed it. I don't want to ask this. I mean, it's just chatter, chatter, chatter. I want you to give yourself this time to learn without judging yourself. This is a time to ask questions, okay? This is the time to ask questions. Believe enough in your own intelligence and your own preparations that have gotten you this far to know that whatever questions you have are not stupid questions, but they're necessary. If you don't know it, ask it. You know, in fact, if you're not asking questions, we're thinking that you're not paying attention. And from a mentor's perspective, if you're not asking questions, we feel like you're asleep with your eyes open. So we welcome questions. We want you to ask questions. We're going to remember you more if you ask questions. Trust that if you have a question, it's a reasonable question, and you are not the only one with that same question. Deepak Chopra says, non-judgment quiets the internal dialogue, and this opens once again the doorway to creativity. So now is the time to learn, to explore, to process, to reflect through your unique lens and make sense of it. However you make sense of what you learn. Because one day you are going to be the translator of that science for your community. So the sum of all those questions that you did not give judgment to is eventually going to be the sum of your intelligence. Does that make sense? So dare to be vulnerable and just stay calm and ask for questions. We're almost done here. I wish someone had told me to make community. I wish someone had told me don't isolate, communicate. For some reason when things rhyme, they just stick in your mind. So don't isolate, communicate. I wish someone had told me that. You know, lift each other up. How are you going to find people to amplify your voice? How are you going to amplify other people's inner voices? You're all here together. You're probably all having, on some level, come on, be honest, a crisis of confidence. Maybe not a crisis, but everyone's wondering if they're going to make it, if they're smart enough, blah, 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 goes on and on and on. I'm not going to fill the room with that negative energy, but you all have this stream of questions going through your head. So make community out of it, you know? Inner work is personal. It's a deeply personal endeavor, but it can draw from the power of the communal. Other people are going through the same thing as you, even if they look all smiley and confident inside. They're probably asking the same questions, just like you are. So learn from each other, expand your mind, and expand your circle. And I would invite you to include people in your circle, like practice real inclusion. Include people in your circle who don't share your same perspective or point of view. Because after all, how did racism start, and sexism start, and homophobia start? Because people stayed within their own circles and their own ideas, got reinforced and reinforced until they thought that that was the only right idea. So I challenge you to involve others in your circle, to expand your mind and to understand, see, and try to conversate with other people and see how they see the world, how they're processing maybe the same things that you're learning. So finally, to make a great dream come true, the first requirement is a great capacity to dream. So I had that dream in the beginning, but I didn't have the confidence or the perseverance that it would take. So only you can focus you. Only you can focus you. I challenge you to be authentic, to do your inner work, to support all this external outer work that you're doing. We have all this external support to hold you up from the outside, but if you're not holding yourself up from the inside when it gets going tough. Ask your questions, make community, and you will persevere. So this is a motivating slide. It says your research adventure awaits, and it really does. I have seen the confidence build in our EXITO scholars. So these are all the scholars in our lab. Maya here with us, we were at a national conference, the Gerontological Society of America, where she presented and got a lot of great feedback for her poster. She was first author on that poster. Jewel, she won, she's undergraduate, and she won the best overall score for graduate and undergraduate posters. We worked a long time on that. You think she wasn't nervous when she got up there to talk? She was. But she was vulnerable, she put herself out there, and she didn't, the first time she presented, she didn't win an award. The second time she presented, she didn't necessarily win an award. You don't have to win an award, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be out there. Yes, she won an award, and that's great. That is truly great. But I got to be with her and see the process as she was building up her confidence. She was also highlighted as a Scholar Spotlight for the CDC, so a little blurb about her went out nationally to our other Alzheimer's disease centers. I don't think she wasn't nervous about that. She was. She put herself out there. So, I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be out there. So this is a quote that I have on my desk. I didn't get the quote right exactly, but I won't repeat that motto again. But anyway, it gives me the idea of what I need. It says, the person you will become is the person you decide to be. Ralph Waldo Emerson actually says it a little bit more gracefully, but this is what I have in front of me at my desk. And it really is a choice. It's an intentional choice to decide how are you going to utilize all of the resources in this environment of abundance where you're at right now. There are a lot of people who aren't here, your own communities, and they're cheering you on. And so I hope that you embrace their cheers for you within your own inner voice, and you begin to amplify your own inner voice, amplify each other's inner voices, and start to really intentionally think about who do you decide to be? Who do you decide to be here? So, in the beginning when I said you got this, I think you got this. I think you got this. Now, if you don't remember anything else from this talk, just make that your mantra. I got this. I got this. I got this. Thank you.